studies that I did.
Really, there is so much use. Oh my gosh. So I'm just really blown away by what you did for my dad. Um, and I realized that I'm not far enough along in the Bardo.
But me neither. I think I'm just as far as you are. You know what the funny thing, the funny story about this is like my manifesting energy just wanted to go, I just read it and then, done. I thought I would do that way because that's how I always do it. I always start at the end. Like I want to
Yeah,
finish really fast.
yeah.
But then I started reading and listening and I was, oh, ships. I can't do this fast. I have to listen to my 952. I have to follow the process step by step. So I read, snipped, snapped, it's pasted into the document that I sent you and really had to read back. Do I have the right thing? Am I following the right steps? And it was refreshing to do it in the correct way. Because it still took me like 5 hours or something to work with it and where to feel into where do I get my information from, because there are a lot of words that are foreign to me. So I was like, okay, I can write it down, but what does it mean? So there was so much in it for me, and I felt the joy of the discovery, of the inquiry, and knowing where to look. And then also making use of the new AI that we have in Secret Energy. It's called Sybil. And we have a special chat for that. So I was even able to share a little piece like, wow, I just, connected. No, that's what I found was it's the way you ask the question. And I feel that it's not just for this AI, this search thing, but it's also for all of us. It's how do we ask the question for everybody to understand what's being asked, to get a correct answer, that it fulfills you or makes sense to you. So I felt a real depth in it.
I experience that all the time with clients because I can pull anything out of the well. What are you
Right.
really wanting to know? Are you asking this? Are you asking that?
Yes.
And I mean, it's just, it can be the difference between what's initiated from the cycle to what's initiated from this cycle. Two
Exactly.
completely different things.
Yeah.
A very simple word that changes and the question changes
Yeah.
quite
Right.
powerfully.
Yeah. And the answers that I got, these are shared in the document, and they resonated so much because I felt I asked the right questions with the right keywords and like really precise, quite simple, but yeah, but efficient. Yeah.
What I was interested in, especially what's a learning edge for me, is that you pulled my dad's death chart. So that would be the day, the time, the place that
Yes.
he died.
Yeah.
And you get the geometry of the universe. And then it appeared you were looking at the earth,
Yes.
then the Venus.
Yes. Shall I explain why I
Yes,
did that?
that's really what I would love to
Yeah.
hear.
It's I always thought, because when we dove into the Bardo, that it was all about the moon. So I first snipped the moon because I wanted to do it fast as a manifesting generator. And then I dove in. I was, oh no, this is a warning. You go too fast, go back and do it again and follow the crumbs, so to speak. And so then I found that you have to look only at the personality side and look at the earth. Then when you have the earth, you look at the exaltation and the planet that is activated by it. So in this case, it was the earth line was 7.1. And then I looked at this part I pulled from my MMI system from Jovian Archive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then you get like all the details. And I looked at the exaltation and detriment. So in this one, it was Venus exalted, as in the basic values and rules imposed on the child, the capacity of the self to guide with authority. And then it says Venus. So, okay, exaltation is Venus. And then what is the detriment? It was distortion intellect that believes only it knows best, the capacity of the self to insist that its authority is best, activated by Mercury. So I knew I had to go to Venus and to Mercury, because in the example that Ra used, it was a Jupiter and Uranus, I believe. So I thought was, oh, I just go to Jupiter and Uranus. So you can see how I all just snipped all that already out, and then I had to go back blank and really dive in and listen and take the step by step. So these are the, oh, I see that I wrote it wrong. It says gradients, but it's the guardians. It's the guardians. So these are the two guardians that are opening the door that you enter when you enter the Bardo states.
So for my dad, so are you saying the exaltation and the detriment of personality Earth or the guardians?
Yes.
Okay, say that whole thing again. The guardians that.
Yeah, so the exaltation and the detriment in the Earth activation are the two planets, because it's duality, it's always two, or the polarity. These are the two guardians that open the door to the Bardo experience. I will change that word. I think it automatically changed. Guardians. Yes.
Wow.
So when I looked at the Venus, it was the 37. I looked again on the personality side. And so, yeah, the Venus is the 37. I don't look at the line because it doesn't say the line. It just says, yeah, it's already in there, of course. It's automatically. But it says the Venus, the 37. And then what fascinated me again, that leadership came up. Like, how is that possible? It's a whole different gate, but there's still this same keynote, sort of same keynote, because the 7.1 was the authoritarian. And then one of the guardians is leadership by example. So, and then I went to the detriment, which was Mercury, the 54.5, and it got the word equanimity. Pronounced that right? Yeah. And then he said, you place these words behind each other. So I got the word, or the name, the role, the magnanimous leader by example. And I was like, how could that possibly fit? It's mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, it was pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah. And then he says that this is the role that you have played, what your actual role was in this lifetime. Like you think you know, because we think of our incarnation cross. But what the actual role is being described in this title that you get when you open the door. This is your name when you open up that door, or your, sort of your name. Or your title. Yeah.
I mean, it's really just, and there's no way until you open the door. I guess if you have a out of body experience, you could, yeah,
maybe
your name,
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. So that you get your role at that point in time of your life. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. So yeah, then I started to, kind of unravel what this word means. And what I tried Google, and then I tried Sybil, and I kind of felt into, I don't know, I just fell into the field of what these words mean to me and what I'm sensing, listening or reading these words. But first he says, the earth sets the sequence. So he started in line 1. So then you get to enter in this line 1, which is time. And then the second stage, in this case, is line 2, which is surrender.
So, and the second line came from?
Earth. You stay in the earth.
Okay. Wait a second. Let me go back. All right. So I'm going back up. So that was, so the earth starts the sequence, right?
Yeah.
So that was in 7.1. So the sequence started in a line 1 that is about time, right?
Right.
All right. And then how does he get, well, let's talk about that.
About the one?
Well, what would you like to talk about? What do you feel is important?
What I also found, but that's something for us to maybe discuss or contemplate on, is that I felt a duality within the detriment, because when I went to Mercury, it only had an exaltation in it, in the description. So I was like, it's a detriment, but then I get an exaltation, and I just left it over there because I'm not knowledgeable enough to say it's right or wrong. I just go with the sequence that I've been given by Ra. But I found that interesting. So then the question that came up for me was like, in what quarter was he born? Because this one is in the quarter of duality, which is about bonding and relationships. So I found that, like, okay, maybe I can use that as a keynote, but well, intuitive, maybe it has nothing to do with it, but I just played with it.
Let me just ask something. So Earth he started in a line 1 because his Earth was in the 7.1. And then how did you get the rest of that sequence, the sequence 1, 2, 3?
Because he says that it's always, how do you say that? It's always behind each other. Yeah, so consecutive. Yes, that's the right word.
So if let's say he had been in the 5, would it have been 5, 6, 1?
Yes.
Or if it was in the 3, it would have been 3, 4, 5.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So that determines the Earth line number, determines the sequence. So once those guardians open the gates, was that the sequence of time right there? Yes. When they were
yes,
opening?
He entered with the theme of time. Yes.
Okay. So the theme of what happens when the gates are open.
Yes. So if you would start in a line 2, you would enter in surrender.
Okay.
And in the documents that I've got from the Bardo, the example starts in the 3, which is chaos. And in this case, this is the ending, is chaos. And then he explains that it's a different experience when you enter into chaos or when you end in chaos. And when I was working with it, I almost sensed it because I felt a joy in the chaos. And while I was listening to Ra about his example of his friend, who was the first one to transition with him having this knowledge and her having already known this knowledge. So she knew kind of that Ra would use her as an example to explain this Bardo sequence. Yeah. and he knew her really well. And like our example, like how amazing it is that your father is kind of giving us this extra boost to investigate this as he transitioned, while we were already exploring this. So yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So just for the shucks of us being recording and people maybe really interested in this, what are the line 4, 5, and 6? Do you remember those keynotes on it? Kind of just talk through my dad. So the first stage of my dad's was time, line 1, and the second stage of his Bardo was surrender, line 2, and the third stage of my dad's Bardo was line 3, or chaos. And he's ending his experience in chaos, which is a completely different experience than beginning in chaos.
Yes.
So yeah.
The 4 is passage.
Passage?
Yes.
Okay.
The 5 is reunion.
Okay.
And the 6 is vision.
Vision.
So you kind of already hear the lines of the hexagrams in them when we are on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 3 is the trial and error,
Right.
and surrender is the natural talent.
Mm.
And time is like, building that foundation takes time. And to investigate the foundation, what is the right foundation, takes time. And 5, reunion, talks about is leadership, and it's putting yourself out there for like the collective, really. It's like for everybody. It's a transitional stage of the 5. And then the vision, the 6 is always looking ahead. So there is a similarity in it. But the funny thing is that Ra writes and says in his Death, Dying, and Bardo that he is still kind of waiting on a soul who feels like really drawn to this material, and write a 60 for the Book of the Death, a Rave Book of the Death. Yeah, I'm not gonna do it, but it would be interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm saying no now, but maybe when I start more playing with it, and it did give me a joy to be able to translate, so to speak, what's behind the veil. Yeah.
All right. So we were with my dad on Earth line 1, and Venus and Mercury opening the doors for him as the magnanimous leader by example. So he goes in to his Bardo there.
And again, this describes what and why he was here for on the Earth plane. It's kind of a job description, but only given at the time you're no longer into the body. That was also like, oh, wow. And because I didn't even know what the word meant, I was like, okay, first let me research what this word means. What is magnanimous? A magnanimous leader don't just build others, but they are great at organization and institution building. They do not have a chronic need to grab all recognition, but rather focus on the larger purpose and involve others, which is essential to build successful interventions and institutions and sustain them. And then, because I got the word magnanimity and humility, I felt like this was important to add to it. Magnanimity and humility are the virtues of the heart. That is, they are dispositional traits, deep habits, if you will, that truly great leaders develop as part of their character. They are strength of character and perfection points of human nature. As virtues of the heart, they form the core of our personality, who we are. Magnanimity is the habit of striving to accomplish great things, or even better, it is the habit of striving to love your people and your destiny to such a depth that great feats and authentic greatness flow naturally out of it in all that you do. Humility is the habit of living in the truth about yourself and the truth about others, in light of the truth about the world around us. It's the habit of accepting, indeed embracing, the reality of our condition. It means abandoning ourselves in total simplicity of life to the one truly important thing, the pearl of great price. Yeah, maybe you feel like because you wrote back to me about that part.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read that for the first time, what did you feel? What went through you?
Yeah, gosh, it's hitting me different than, when I read it. So maybe it's had time to sink in a little bit. I My dad was a leader in his work. And he was always, most of his life, he was a public servant. So he worked most of his life in airport management. So he always reported to a board. And I feel like as a leader, he had a great deal of personal integrity. He had a moral compass, and that made him to other people sometimes difficult because he was unwavering in his integrity. And when you report to a board, that's a big group of people with a lot of different personalities and desires and integrity and corruption. And
you really have to stand your ground, I feel, when you say that. Yeah.
He really did. And, in the end, several times it cost him his job because his integrity was so unbendable. He really took to heart that he was working for a higher good, like the people
Right.
serve,
Right. Yeah.
the public.
Right.
And
not the board.
He would not bend to corruption. And he often had board members who were corrupt.
Yeah.
And, he was safe as long as there was a majority that was also in integrity. But people, I think it would be fair to say that many would have said that he was difficult because he was unbending in his principles and how he led. And at one point in what you wrote up, there was a comment. I don't think it was at this stage, but it was on another stage. It was his way or the highway.
Yeah, I mean, that's my personal note. Yeah.
Yeah. Even as children, it was his way or the highway. It's his way or you paid a price.
Right.
And
yeah, we can go to that part because when we have opened the door now with this name and this title, and then we can go to the first line of the Earth Gate 7, which says authoritarian, the iron hand, both enlightened and despotic.
Yes.
And then in the theme of time, I asked Sybil, in the context of the Bardo, the word time can be interpreted as representation of the transitional period between one's death and one's rebirth. It relates to the ever-changing nature of existence, emphasizing the impermanence of life and the cyclical process of birth, death, and rebirth. Here, time highlights the importance of continual personal transformation and the need for proper spiritual guidance and education to navigate the intermediate state and choose the right womb door for a better reincarnation in this sense. Time also signifies the opportunity for growth and progress in one's spiritual journey. When I think of time as a theme, I think of earthly time, the time spent on earth in a vessel with family and loved ones. In this case, as an authoritarian, I feel like this is about his childhood memories, self-actualization, the pleasure and pain of growing into adulthood and having all this the spiritual time to reflect, play, and have fun, seeing and experiencing what he felt was of value during his childhood. And then I said, now sensing what you shared about him being in the 10th gate and his soul speaking to you and shared with you about what you shared about the self-love he had to experience. I feel like this was a preparation for him to enter his Bardo with love for himself, and therefore not judging the lesser things during this lifetime, but finally only feeling the joy of being a youngster, a self-made man, is what I hear. And when I go down the rabbit hole, I feel he might have been the leader of his pack, or he might have experienced a despotic person controlling his life, but being able to break free from that person or authority institute over time. And then I asked, or I looked up what that word means. But what I wanted to share, because you went into it, at the end I said, I am leaning in more on the self-made man. And then what came to me was my way or the highway kind of path. And then when you came back with that, I was like, oh.
Everything was very much his way or the highway. And it was so fascinating. I feel like, so my grandmother was, his childhood was under the thumb of a petty tyrant. I mean, my grandmother was really, she loved me more than probably almost anyone in the world. And she was, lived with them, she and my grandfather and my mother, but my mother worked, but for the first 4 years of my life. And so I was her baby, and I was sick when I was born. So she really loved me. And there was kindness in her heart for me, where, even growing up, I could see that she treated other people differently. I was special to her. So, but she, the stories that my father did tell of her growing up was, she ruled with an iron hand, and she had 4 sons and a daughter, and she worked them to death. I mean, like, really was a tyrant about, cleanliness and, yard work. And I mean, even when I was a little child, I remember, being 4 years old, and I had my own ironing board and my own iron, little one, and the iron worked. And
Right.
my job
Was
every week was, I had to iron at
Wow.
4 years old.
Wow.
Probably at 3, but I had to iron my grandfather's handkerchiefs, and they had to all be ironed every stage and stacked.
And then,
And I also had to iron all of his underwear. So he, wore these big.
yeah, those were big in those days. Yeah.
It would take me a whole day. I would standing out.
Right.
My grandmother would be ironing the sheets or ironing the other laundry. There I was in my own little ironing board.
Right.
Ironing just like her. So when my father tells stories of, his mom is a despot, like, I kind of understand because,
Yeah, you had
you know, for
experienced it
me, she made
yourself.
it a little
Yeah.
game, you know.
But still, you did the work.
I did the
She knew
work.
how to play you.
Oh yeah, she knew how to play me, and she would, you know, on cleaning day, I was, you know, like, um, I
Working.
didn't have to push the big heavy vacuum, but I had a dust rag in my hand on cleaning day, you know, and even though there was a maid, we were all, you know, at 4, I had a dust rag in my hand. I mean, I remember this stuff. So those, you know, I remember about to 4, but I can imagine it didn't just start at 4. I'm sure
No,
as soon as I could walk, she had a
but you can walk, you can work.
yeah, you know, or on yard day, you know, like I had to hold the bucket with the, you know, for the weeds, or, you know, I had to help wash the driveway, you know, and I had a child-sized broom, and I had to sweep.
Right.
She was, you know,
Yeah. She was
so
really prepping you for doing like the real work. And in between, you still did some work for her because then she didn't have to iron those underwears herself.
the handkerchiefs, you
Yeah,
know,
and the handkerchiefs. Yeah,
mhm.
like double.
And yeah, and so I mean, when, you know, my father tells stories of her kind of despotic nature with them, I get it, you know, and um, you know, but he also told stories of, you know, the things he and his brothers would get up to. So, you know, there's a part of me that goes, well, I kind of understand why she was a little despot, because, you know, if they weren't working, they were getting into trouble. You know,
Right.
like, you know, you know, they were being kids,
Yeah,
right?
4 boys. Yeah, or 3 boys
Mhm.
and 1 girl. Yeah.
But I know there was a fear of her because my father tells us one story. They were doing something, he and his brothers, and one of his brothers got black tar on part of him that was hot, and it burned him in the tar. And so he hid in his room for 2 days, as opposed to
Going
telling
to
my
help.
grandmother that
Right.
he had gotten into this tar, because he knew she was going to beat him before she like, trying to avoid the beating. And, you know, so think about that, a child choosing pain for 2 days, you know, and the
Right.
only reason she ever found out was because he didn't come downstairs. So they were all bringing him food up to the room, you know. So eventually, after 2 days, she goes, look for him.
What's going on? Yeah. Oh,
And there
wow.
he is in massive pain because he's got this horrible burn.
Right.
So that just, you know, kind of,
That resonated. Yeah.
mhm.
Wow.
um, so I know he had uh, fun times as a younger child with his brothers, but also that life was hard. But then he turns around and that's how he is with us.
Yeah.
You know, that's how he becomes the petty tyrant, the despot with us as children. Our house was violent, you know, and abusive,
Oh,
and it was his way or the highway, you know. And
yeah. So when you read that, you really resonated with it. You recognized it. You related to it.
yeah, I mean, I did a lot of soul communication with my father while he was alive. Even before he had Alzheimer's, I would work with him from time to time. And um, later on in his life, his soul would say to me that he wanted forgiveness, but he didn't have the courage to apologize.
Oh,
And at the end, the day before he went into the VA, which is the Veterans Association Administration. He went into um, 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 a home um, provided for by the government for federal employees, for military personnel who served
mhm.
and who can't take care of themselves. So he went into VA, and it was one of the nicest places in Louisiana. I went with my mother to check it out, and it was a fantastic, fantastic facility. He was in the best of care in a beautiful place with really great employees. And um, the night before he went in, some things happened at our home. It was a really hard experience, but it was the day I was just like, I'm not going to choose this abuse anymore. So I left. And then the next day I went back to their house, and he didn't know that we were taking him to live in the VA. He knew he was going for tests. So, because he was either deep in Alzheimer's or he was there, like he was still at the place where he was going in and out. And so that morning I arrived and I sat next to him on the couch, and my mom said, well, I'm going to go get my purse. And I said, I'm going to use the restroom. I was sitting right next to him, and I stood up to use the bathroom, and he kind of followed me. And I turned around and I looked at him. I said, Daddy, I'll be right back. I'm just going to the bathroom. And he kind of grabbed my hand and he got right in my face. We were looking eye to eye, and he said, thank you for forgiving me.
Oh. I'm feeling
Yeah.
that. I don't know why, but whoa.
Oh, I mean, and I knew then that our work was done. Like we had come full circle, and um, the purpose of our relationship was fulfilled, right? And so then when he was in the VA, I was talking to his soul and communicating with him that way. And that's when his soul told me that he had created that experience to learn how to receive love. And I thought, wow, that's a powerful experience, because through the journey of Alzheimer's and dementia, um,
You have to
you
receive.
become reliant
Yeah.
on people for everything. And eventually he couldn't walk, so he was bedridden. And then and then all of this was, he went in right before COVID. He went in the August before COVID, so maybe he was in September, August before COVID. So 6 months before COVID really hit. And then my mom couldn't even go to the home for a year and a half, because they were in lockdown.
Yeah.
And so he's completely reliant on
On
other people. And
strangers.
then
Yeah.
he did have COVID and he was in the hospital. And then with COVID, there was more and more degeneration of his body, so that he was more and more reliant on other people to feed him, to bathe him, to, you know, get him in and out of bed, to move him around, to, for everything. So he
Yeah.
really had to learn to receive, right?
Wow.
Really, and when I was talking to his soul through that time, his soul was telling me that this work, this time on earth where he's receiving love, is escalating the next incarnation, because he didn't have to come in and learn that again.
Right.
So I
Right.
understood his work, and I valued that.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
then, me, eventually his soul told me that he was working on loving himself. So, receiving love, the capacity to receive love,
First of all,
is in a sense about self-love,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Because
It all starts with the self. If you don't love yourself, you never can fully love another. Then it's fake love, it's dependent love. Yeah.
and nor can you receive, it's, if you don't love you can only receive love to the extent that you love yourself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that last time I saw him, a week and a half or so before he transitioned, I'm holding his feet and Reikiing him and asking his soul, has he learned how to love himself, and that was when, his soul just showed me fields and fields of sunflowers.
Mhm.
And I felt, this, I call it the energy of like the burning bush, where it's hot and cold energy, run all the way through me. And I felt like his soul was saying yes.
Yeah.
So I knew it was.
And in that love, I feel the forgiveness, like he, through this experience and being able to finally receive love, you forgave him and he was grateful for that. But I feel that he was able to forgive himself.